Great. Well, yeah, absolutely delighted to share kind of just an overview of what I've been working with, really with both papers. Let's see. I was having a hard time titling it um, and not calling it Amy's Doom and Gloom, but here we are. So I've been working with this concept of really why I'm here is because I'm very interested in how can we shift our perception and shift consciousness away from this human-centric consciousness that we have towards an earth-centric consciousness. And what I have learned is that we are living in the geological epoch called the Anthropocene, which is the time when humans have really placed ourselves at the center of importance of life on Earth. And we are causing the largest impact on the climate and environment through our actions, as we all know. We are perpetuating our own demise. And we are clearly in an environmental crisis and collapse of our own making. I have a bunch of pictures for this month, all of them really hard to look at. The Gulf of Mexico was on fire, July 5th. The ocean, July 16th, flooding all over Europe, Western Europe. July 19th, this is a picture from a friend's cell phone in Eastern Washington, Mazama, Washington. The West Coast, and even all the way to Minnesota is on fire. And the smoke has reached New York City. The red sun, we know on the West Coast, we know this red sun all too well. And then in China, I had a really hard time finding pictures of the flooding in China from July 2021, because this has been happening for years in China. I didn't realize that. I didn't know this. And I think the next picture is the hardest one for me to look at. And meanwhile, we have these bozos, these billionaires, sending themselves to space while we're having these catastrophic climate crises that are perpetuating homelessness and all the inequity of the
Amy, can I ask a question? Can you go back? I just missed okay, sorry. I just missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, I was trying to find one that was equivalent to the picture in Europe, but of towns and cities completely flooded, but they were all from 2020, just a full year ago. Yeah. So, and this one, I don't want to say it so long. It's a hard one they're all hard to look at, but Jeff Bezos thanking Amazon employees and customers for paying for his trip to the edge of space. I can't understand how, anyone could ever buy anything from him again, but there you have it. So we're really suffering from what I see as a separation from nature. In my research, really what I have found as the basis of this considering ourselves separate from nature is the work of Descartes and the separation of the body and mind and the separation of nature from culture, and really looking at the point where the clear Western consciousness separated itself, saying we are superior, that the thinking analytical mind is superior to the natural world, and that this illusion of separation. One thing I recently read, and I haven't verified it, is that Descartes came up with this theory. He got stuck in a sauna and had hallucinations and came up with this theory at that time, which I thought was interesting. But it's called Cartesian dualism, this separation. And what I've been thinking about the past week is, and really wondering, like, where does environmental justice and social justice, where do they meet? And thinking about how by othering ourselves from the earth, from the other species of the earth, has led us to othering each other, like simple, easy steps of separation. But really, there's so much research and showing that this is an illusion. Like, how can we reconnect with nature when we are intrinsically part of nature? We are creating weather patterns. We are made up of the same cells that make up all of life, and we are interconnected. Like, one species without we cannot survive without each other. So really, again, like, what I'm interested in is this change of perspective and change of consciousness, moving from considering other beings, each other as objects versus subjects, looking at how do we come back to a we-ness, as one, I think Nurit Bird David called it, from the otherness, like where we pit ourselves against each other, and really remembering our rightful place in the systems of life. And a big piece, I think, coming up to the next point, is that by committing ourselves to these concepts of the mind and the body being separate, culture from nature being separate, that we are superior to all other life, essentially. We've really dulled our ability to perceive and to see and to understand what's actually happening by being stuck in these patterns of thinking that we know everything. So how can we shift that? And specifically from the point of an educator, how can we shift that in teachers? How can we shift that in children? And one piece that I'm really interested in is developing the worldview of an animistic worldview, which means that essentially there are so many different definitions, but where I'm coming from is an understanding or worldview that all beings in the natural world are imbued with hexeity and deserving of respect and care. And hexeity is essentially, it's the essence, or in the thisness versus whatness, that subject versus object, the having integrity and beingness that is deserving of respect and care. Animism has been looked at as like the consciousness of primitive people. When it was first coined in the 1860s or 70s, that was really what it was considered, was primitive, inferior thought patterns and ways of being in the world that are also associated primarily with indigenous epistemologies, but also with the consciousness of children, very common also in the British Isles, in Scandinavia, and really all over the world, of these, nature spirits is often how they are discussed or perceived. That this animism, that the world is alive. It's animism can look, the world view is a relational view between the human, the environment, the different beings that make up the environment. And then looking at personhood, like who deserves this respect of acknowledgement of personhood. We've talked about this, I think, in the humane education talk about animals in particular. But this goes to really all beings, the water, the air, in my personal mind and thoughts. And then there's a lot of times, because we are so self-centered or human-centered, that animism can be looked at looked at as like anthropomorphism, like imbuing human qualities in other beings. But that is going right, I think, hand in hand with this human-centric worldview. Something that has been really interesting and engaging is this understanding that like nothing is static, that everything in life is in the process of becoming, of beingness, of emergence. I think a lot about plastic and the plastic I use, because it will never leave, but it does shift. It does shift and break down and become, microplastic. It too is in a state of becoming always. And so I'll then to the like where my hope and joy comes in all this doom and gloom is the using it, how we can access this understanding that the world is alive through the local indigenous stories, that these stories are, they endow and assume personhood of other beings. That is a big piece of the local stories here where I am, but generally speaking across the world, that I think I understand this to be true. And so these stories, by engaging with them and working with them and penetrating them and sharing them with children within the context of also being engaged in the natural world and coming into relationship with these other beings, where it's not about knowing or taking apart, looking at the pieces, but at being actually in relationship with, these stories are just like a doorway into gaining perspective of the long history, the long memory of these beings who have been here for time immemorial, and have created the place where we are. I think while I speak, I'm thinking of cedar. Like I am in the land of cedar, also known as grandmother cedar, the long life giver. That and the cedars are dying. The climate is changing and making it unhospitable to the cedar tree here. So my hope is, or my thinking is, that by bringing generations into relationship, where we are not seeking anything except the knowledge that comes from relating, that this will open us to perception, being able to perceive life in a way that is more, that our senses become more subtle and more open, and that we begin to understand our right place here on the earth, and with this land that sustains us. And in that, I do believe that we will be able to come together more as humanity when we stop othering ourselves as a species. We can also stop othering our brothers and sisters and siblings in life. And that is what I have to share with you. Thank you.
Okay, let's open it up for some discussion, maybe question.
Amy, I just want to say our presentations are going to go together so nicely because there's some very similar themes. So I'm excited to, I'm excited about that. I love the work that you're doing. And one thing that came to mind when you were talking about like anthropomorphism, like with kind of my background working a lot with non-human animals, you know, anthropomorphism comes up all the time, especially when I'm looking more into the academic thoughts on like our relationships with other animals. And one term that I came across pretty early in my master's program, I don't know if you have heard of Franz de Waal, but he does a lot of really great work on non-human animal emotions. He's primarily like a primatologist, but he's done written some beautiful books about just the emotional lives of other animals and why we should be considering that. And one of the terms he coined a really long time ago, well, I guess I don't quite remember exactly when it was, but it's called anthropodenial. And so the denial, like basically he's talking about where there's a point in which we are harming our relationships and interactions with other animals by denying that they do experience the same emotions that we do. And so when you were talking about that, I thought of him and that term, because I use that term a lot when I write about these things, because it so nicely captures, you know, like we can't deny that I love how you said, like, I love that you kept saying how the world is alive. Like, we can't deny that. Like, and we keep trying for some reason. And so anyways, I just wanted to share that and see if you have any thoughts about that. But thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. I know as soon as Tony said that we're the two sharing, I was just like, oh yeah, those will go together just fine. I don't have any thoughts about that, but I appreciate you sharing it. Thank you.
Amy, I just got done reading Bell Hooks's Belonging, A Culture of Place, and one of the really interesting things that she talks about is the connection of the land and the way in which like it's like about like bringing, like, so she's like raised in Kentucky, and so she talks a lot about like when she went off to Stanford and how much like it was just such a traumatic experience for her, like being detached from the land and being detached from like nature, and also just like what the culture of just being it was very close-minded and very judgmental against being from Kentucky. And so she ends up back in Kentucky at the end, and she just talks a lot about like reclaiming that connection with the land and how that can be like such a healing place. And anyways, there's a lot to the book, but it's so I highly recommend it in terms of just like parts of it I think really do connect, and it's a beautiful read. I'm like working through all of her books, so that was the first one that I started with, since my dissertation is on like home and place essentially as well. So I was interested in reading what she had to say. It's right here.
Awesome, thank you.
Have you heard of, Amy, that was amazing. Have you heard of phenomenological research?
Yes, that's been coming up quite a bit, yeah.
Okay, so I transferred into this program, and in my other program, we took a class in phenomenological research, which is a way, it's one of the, I guess, methodologies in which you can create your dissertation and your end, I guess, writing. But it is very entrenched into, I don't want to say whatness, because it's not object, it's in the being of whatever moment it's in, and it's of everyone, everything, every part of this place of being, and sitting in those moments. And so when you started talking about by having or understanding or listening to Indigenous stories, that's very centered in phenomenological research. I'm going to run to my bookshelf and bring some books over to hold up, because I think that they would be very helpful in your process, in your research, and it's also very related to connecting as life, and it talks a lot about life worlds. And some people did a whole life world research or dissertation on the life world of Trump, like the of all of that happened in that world of us being under his rule, right? But all of the life worlds that impacted, inclusive of the environment, all of those issues. So I'll be back. I'm gonna go look on my bookshelf.
Awesome. This is fantastic. Thank you all so much.
Amy, I also, my research is in a similar vein. And I pulled up a paper that I read that I haven't yet been able to incorporate into my research paper, but it's something that I had read in preparation for it. And it speaks about how, so I'm looking more directly at non-human animals and education about them. And this particular paper discusses how, or the viewpoint of the author is that we can't teach about animals or teach about the world without it being anthropocentric, because it's coming from our perspective and we can't know the perspective of these other beings. And the paper finishes, so the author's suggestion basically is rather than teaching about animals, we should learn to teach the grace of leaving them be and learn how to unthink humanity or unthink ourselves. And that just your presentation reminded me of that, and the how we've created this duality between us and them, and like, even though we can't completely deny anthropocentrism in that, you know, we're humans and we are going to, anything that we say is inherently has some anthropocentrism in it. So we can't deny that, but a way of kind of working around it is to try to unlearn the idea that humans are different or separate.
Oh my gosh, I totally love that. Please send, I'll have Mally share the books really quick, because she's ready, she's holding them up.
Mally,
Sorry,
so yeah, there we go. Yes.
Transformation or transformative, phenomenology. So the people who wrote this taught the class, but it's really, it was one of the most enlightening classes I've ever had.
Okay, did we get into the work that Charles Peirce and others have done? Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right, good. So
yep. And then making social worlds.
can you move it to, yes, perfect. So folks can see it. And, Blackwell Publishing is a very legitimate publisher. Excellent. Thank you, Mally. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I
I would like to ask what program you transferred from.
University of the Virgin Islands. It was creativity and leadership for innovation and change. But the trademark, it's a trademark of Foresight, which is a program that kind of created this creative inquiry, and innovation is an actual process that is not what we think it is when we think of the word innovative. And so, yeah, but it was creative leadership for innovation and change, but I was in a track of educational leadership for change.
Glad you're here now.
Indeed.
Me too.
Okay. Well, just a few words before we get to Emily's promising presentation. The notion of isness. In philosophy, this is a problem, right? The problem of mind-body problem is always there. You know, anytime you get into any kind of philosophical discourse, not anytime, but many times, the discourse begins with the usual problems, right? What are we going to do about the mind-body separation problem? What are we going to do about the free will versus determinism, and so on. Then there's this notion of I'm looking at this table, and I must be concerned about the isness of the table. It's matter, but all things are energy. So how did energy turn into matter? And how does matter go back to being energy? Aren't we all matter and energy? And when we say all, then we have to start thinking about ontology, which is a major branch of philosophy. What's in nature? What's around us? I often use this as a way to get into discussions about digital natives versus digital immigrants, which is some of us in this room, and I suspect those of us who are, were born after the invention of the internet can be considered digital natives. So the ontology of a digital native is different than the ontology of a digital immigrant. Ontologically, digital natives see the internet as part of nature. Now, the Native Americans, as Amy was correctly pointing out, saw the same thing about the ecosystem. We're all part of it. It's a wholeness. But Westerners who took over the world in many ways brought in this separation and became, in their minds, which is solipsistic, right? Solipsism is another school of thought about, how we are trapped. I don't know if some of you watched that presentation on Matrix that I give. I talk about the egocentric predicament. We are trapped in our little bubble of thinking. That's solipsism, right? Who mentioned, Mally, you were talking about Trump, right? How we were trapped under Trump's world because his mind was solipsistic, right? Whatever existed in his mind was the world. And he wanted those who did not conform with what he was seeing, he saw as enemies that needed to be exterminated, like bugs and so on, that other humans, anthropocentric humans look at. So I think what Amy's presentation was pointing to was we are in desperate need of a paradigm shift. We get out of our egocentric bubbles and become no more solipsistic, and we become open to the world as it is, the isness of the ontology around us, which, digital stuff is part of it too. This is wonderful stuff that we are doing at this level because you're the ones who are going to go out there and spread the message to others and see to what extent we can have success. One of the problems about this paradigm shift business is that we often, when I say we, the general we, often try to apply rationality to our arguments, to our presentations, to our books, to our, programs and so on, and say, well, people are rational beings. They will understand that this makes sense and this is good for planet Earth, it's good for our universe, etc. And all of that may be true, but to reach someone, to bring someone to a point where they just open up rather than close down further, we need to go beyond rationality, or perhaps even less rationality and more the other stuff. And the other stuff should be the kind of stuff that we get into inquiry about, the connection between mind, body cannot be separated. How do emotions enter the picture? They're not just biological responses. It's not just chemicals moving about in our bodies that generate emotions. I'd say 99% of humanity is not sociopathic. So we all have emotions. We display them differently and so on. So this opens up avenues that I think we can have a whole conference about this. where these kinds of presentations are excellent and grounded in good research and good thinking, but scholars that are thinking about how do we do this differently so we can actually make inroads into changing the paradigm. So it's the kind of stuff that excites me, and I hope it excites you too. So we can continue as our program grows, think about, organizing. And I think you guys are very capable of organizing these kinds of, conferences where we can talk about this stuff and just open it up for conversations that can be erudite. So Amy, thank you. And now we move to the next presentation by our very own Emily.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Tony. You always make me think of things I've never thought about before, so I appreciate it. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen, the right screen.
Ah, there it is.
You see a cute little puppy?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes here. Too many tabs. Anyone else have that problem? Okay, so like Amy, I'm also going to be talking about my final paper topic. And I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts afterwards, or throughout if you would like, and hopefully we can, kind of discuss these topics further. I mean, I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about is very similar to what we've been talking about. So hopefully maybe I can stir up a few additional thoughts. But I'm going to be talking about the need for humane pedagogy and how non-human animal professionals educate their clients and communities. Oh, and I have, look at that, we have, I don't know if you could see that notification that just popped up on my screen, but there's some talk happening in the Slack channel for our cohort. So I want to start out by asking us all to kind of critically reflect on this question for a moment. So what are your biases about other animals? So when you think about like a dog, when you look at this cute little dog on the screen, or when you think about cats, what like thoughts and feelings come to mind? Like what are the maybe the labels that come to your mind? Are there any like emotions or memories that get stirred up when you think about, dogs or cats? Feel free if you want to like share in the chat, or if you want to like unmute yourself. I like kind of, I don't know, I want to hear what you think about cats and dogs. Any just like brief opinions, thoughts, what comes to mind?
Well, this is kind of unfair because you put two of the cutest animals there, and so how can we say anything negative about these two?
I'm not expecting anything negative. I'm just expecting like, what are those what are you when I at least for me, when I talk of biases, I talk about like, or I'm thinking about like, what are those kind of like almost unconscious like gut feelings that you have about something. So biases don't necessarily have to be negative. Mm-hmm. I see Macy put in the chat, cuddly, friendly, smart. Lisa's commenting on those eyes.
I will admit that when I think or look at dogs, I think of poop bags.
That's a thing. Yep.
I'm thinking about this from a racialized society, right? I can say that because so culturally, Black Americans have a very otherist sort of relationship with pets. And I know I'm speaking in generality, but with animals, with pets, with any of that, and there is a critique and judgment of people who are animal rights advocates, right? Like they're, and a critique of how we interact with pets. For example, I am like one of the most defied of stereotypes. I have a Persian, a doll-faced Persian child, and that is exactly how he is treated because that is my child. And but that's very far out of stereotypical Black culture. So when I look at it, like I am, oh my gosh, babies, but that's not culturally how even I was raised. I actually happened to be raised, my stepdad is just like a dog lover. Like that's how he finds peace, is spending time with dogs. That was also a rarity. So growing up with that has, I guess, gave me a little bit more freedom to like what I liked or to advocate for what I advocate for. But I would say that there are a lot of racialized, categorized biases when it comes to cats and dogs or animals, period.
That's so interesting. Like I've never thought about that. And one of the things that I hope to kind of explore in my research is there is a very distinct lack of people of color in people who work with non-human animals. Like when last year, when everyone was really stepping up and trying to support like Black-owned businesses, my training community, I'm an animal trainer, you know, we were trying to step up and see how we could support other like Black animal trainers, and there are like 3, like in the whole, like there's so few. And so, you know, one of the things I hope to kind of model through my work and encourage other professionals to model is like, how can we diversify the field? And you know, like when I'm hearing you talking about kind of these perspectives, like I'm like, well, why is that? And so I'd love to maybe dig into that sometime a little bit to hear more about why that is. So
yeah, I mean, I could.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I could guess, but I really don't have the answer to the why, right? I just know the what or what it is. And I think a lot of it is also rooted in fear. So there's that. But I would also say, I was gonna say this from even Amy's presentation or tell a story, in that in 2018, I had a brain aneurysm rupture and I was at home, and I just remember the lightning flash, but I lived by myself in Boston with, I'm sorry, I didn't live by myself. I lived with Young Thug, which is my cat's name. And the reason why I lived is Young Thug was trying to wake me up. And then I finally got up and went to use the restroom as a middle-aged woman. It was like, oh, I have to use the restroom. And I see that I've fallen, like I fell, and I called 911. But I say that to say that is a story to show that we aren't others, that we aren't superior, that there are feelings and emotions and thought lives. But it would rarely happen to a person of color have a pet like that they would even be able to experience that sort of is it relationship or experience the realness of non-human animals being of value.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I think I love hearing those types of experiences because I think they, you know, like you just said, I mean, it exemplifies how valuable, you know, other animals are and how we can develop these very important relationships with them, and we should allow ourselves to have these connections. I think sometimes we feel like we need to resist, you know, those connections. So thank you for sharing. I did want to go to the next slide here because this is a very similar question. It's a follow-up question. What are your thoughts and feelings? What are your biases about these animals? So, when you think of pigs, when you see pigs, when you look at this dirty but adorable pig, what do you think about? What comes to mind? Same with chickens. Now, chickens are really interesting because, if you hear the word chicken, does what come to mind? Is it this, what I think a very cute little chicken, or is it food? Like what comes to mind when you hear these words, when you see pictures, when you see them out in the real world? Like if you see a rat on the street, what do you think? And then bats, I know bats are another one that some people have strong feelings about. Lisa is chiming in the chat. Lisa says pigs make her think of Wilbur, which love. Chicken, fresh eggs. Bats, bug eaters, love that. Chickens and rats go together in my mind. Very interesting, Amy. Sarah says pigs are smart but noisy at night. I did not know they were noisy at night. I'll have to talk more about that. Chicken, life-giving with their eggs. Rats, as long as they aren't in my house, they are fine. Bats are adorable, but don't bite me, please. Love that. So thank you for sharing. I think these the reason, Macy just says they have hard lives. Yes. So the reason why I'm asking these questions is because we all have biases about other animals, but they're not something we generally stop and critically reflect on. But this is so important because these biases, these gut feelings, these perceptions of these other animals drive our behavior towards these other animals. And yes, Mally, as she points out, we even categorize them in a hierarchical way, and I'm getting there. And so, I'm thinking about like Dana McFall's presentation during the residency. These biases that shape our behavior towards non-human animals can even shape our behavior towards other humans. But that is to say that just because that's true, that doesn't mean we should care only about these issues only because they impact humans. We should also care because they impact non-human animals in the natural world. And so the two things I plan on discussing further in my paper, kind of looking at from a philosophical perspective, inspired by Dr. Kashani. But speciesism and anthropocentrism are very important to acknowledge. These, I consider these kind of biases that we're just kind of born with. They're part of how our brain operates when we think about other animals in the natural world. So speciesism is defined by valuing certain species over others. So kind of talking about that hierarchy that Mally just mentioned. Anthropocentrism is very similar to speciesism, but it refers more specifically to humans morally valuing themselves over all other species. So, human-centric is how it's literally defined. And so, for example, we are often like, speciesist in that we as a society tend to value dogs more than we value other species. So, we have that hierarchy. We might place dogs at the top and cats maybe a little under dogs, depending on the person you talk to. And then, of course, we're talking about rats and bats, maybe lower on the hierarchy, and don't even get me started on cockroaches because I found a cockroach in my house last week. And so, thinking about that, these, even the hierarchies that we have in our minds with just thinking about non-human animals, and then our anthropocentric biases lead us to value ourselves and other humans, or maybe other types of humans, more than we value, say, dogs. And so that's a huge part of what I deal with, is kind of working with people who sure, they love their dogs, but they might treat their dogs in a way that makes it very obvious that they significantly value themselves over their dogs. And so, and to be clear, humans should value and care for our own species, but anthropocentrism can result in humans caring for other humans at the expense or the exclusion of other species. And so that's, I think, where like anthropocentrism and speciesism becomes detrimental, is when these inconsistencies in how we value other beings results in us treating other beings at the expense of other beings. And these biases also influence the language we use by, you know, as Amy was talking about, like removing our kind of anonymity, reinforcing the otherness of non-human species. So for example, how we have this dichotomy of human versus animal, but the reality is that humans are animals. And then this otherness allows us humans to more easily commodify and exploit other animals. And again, as Dana discussed during the residency, you know, this otherness, this putting some types of humans at the top of the hierarchy can lead us to potentially be more likely to exploit other humans. And so kind of to bring it back to my paper topic a little bit more specifically, I'm going to be talking about how non-human animal professionals, so veterinarians, shelter and rescue staff, and volunteers, training and behavior professionals, how they must have the critical thinking skills to be aware of these biases and how they shape our behavior towards all animals, including humans and the environment. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because, as I mentioned, I myself am an animal behavior professional. These are just some of the adorable dogs that I've worked with over the years. And while I don't have them pictured, their guardians, so the humans who care for them, are really the most important beings that I teach in the work that I do. So, you know, teaching a dog to sit, teaching a dog to walk loosely on leash, or even, you know, teaching a cat to stop scratching the furniture, you know, those things are easy in comparison to teaching a very biased human to think differently about another species. You know, I often run into, like, most of my clients end up, you know, they have such strong feelings about why their animals are doing what they're doing. You know, they think that it's, you know, my dog's peeing on the floor out of spite. And when we think about that, it's really hard to treat our dog kindly because we think they're being mean and spiteful towards us. And so, you know, part of my job is shifting those biases, those perceptions that we have about our animals' behavior, and maybe realizing, oh, actually that dog might be afraid that you're leaving him alone, for example. And so when we can reframe how we think about our animals in that way, it then changes how we behave and treat our animals. And then I also had experience working in shelters and rescues, and have many years of experience working in other contexts in the animal industry, such as veterinary hospitals. And so I know that a huge part of what these professionals do every day is education. We are educating our clients, our human clients, the people that we interact with on non-human animal behavior, welfare. But what I hope to kind of inspire in my work is to consider, like, what are we really teaching people about other animals? Are we like helping to break down some of these biases? And so this is kind of where my interest is. Our very own Stephen Brookfield. So I don't know if you've all had the chance to like meet him yet in the program, but he is amazing, does all this awesome work on adult education and critical thinking and anti-racism. one of my favorite quotes from one of his books is, "Thinking critically lies at the heart of acting powerfully." So I believe that my colleagues and I, we can and we should teach the general public critical thinking skills in a way that deepens empathy for others and motivates them to act powerfully to better coexist with all species and the natural world. And so a question that I am going to be exploring, but how, while education is a huge part of what animal professionals do, we aren't taught how to be educators. We're not taught how to teach. Sometimes veterinarians, I think, might get some, some like client communication type coursework. Some animal trainers might get that depending on the program, if they even attend a program, but for the most part, we're not taught how to be educators. And so how do I teach them to teach these skills? How do they integrate some of this work into their how they educate people? And so kind of where I think that this can work is humane pedagogy. So humane pedagogy is a philosophy and practice of teaching that is derived from comprehensive humane education, which is an approach to education that teaches and inspires critical thinking, empathy, and compassionate action in how humans interact with all species, including other humans and the natural world. I feel like I'm talking a long time, but I'm wrapping up, I promise. So humane pedagogy is not currently taught to or intentionally practiced by animal professionals, to my knowledge at least. And so, some professionals might have knowledge of humane education. And there are like animal shelters, for example, who have humane education programs, but these programs are very often focused on teaching children to be kind to companion animals. And of course, this is important, but I'm arguing that humane pedagogy should be that more comprehensive approach to humane education, where we are looking at the intersections between, animal protection, human rights, and environmental preservation. And so I kind of hope to investigate this further, why and how should humane pedagogy be integrated into the work of veterinary shelter and behavior professionals. And this will include evaluating whether humane pedagogy has the power to break down these biases that we have about other animals and to teach learners of all ages the value of all sentient beings. And sentient beings are, at least in the researchers who kind of work in this field, they define sentient beings as those who can experience a variety of feelings and emotions, such as suffering and pain and fear and joy and so much more. And I really believe that professionals in these contexts, such as animal shelters and veterinary hospitals, are in a unique position to demonstrate that non-human animals are indeed sentient beings. We're in a unique position to deepen the empathy that our clients experience for these other animals. And so, I hope to explore further in my paper and throughout this program if humane pedagogy can enable professionals to, develop empathy in others and also expand empathy beyond just the individual animals in front of us, but to other species and maybe other humans, and of course to the natural world. And so one thing I did want to kind of just share, humane pedagogy has just been recently proposed. For the first time last year, there was a paper on it where someone was kind of arguing for humane pedagogy. So more research and discussion is needed. There's definitely not any research on humane pedagogy in the context of animal shelters or veterinary hospitals or, animal training. And so I will be kind of digging into this myself, maybe paving a new path here. But you know, I really hope to investigate if humane pedagogy can help guide these professionals on, you know, how to teach critical thinking skills, how to develop empathy in the people we interact with, and of course, how do we then inspire compassionate action? Because it's not just about feeling these good feelings about other animals, it's about actually changing our behavior, making choices that are more humane and sustainable for not only these animals, but also the environment that they live. So if you're interested in my references, please email me. And then I just had a few kind of questions that I wanted to pose to kind of, if we want to discuss them, we can, but I just like to throw up some potential discussion questions to get people's minds rolling. But that's it. What do y'all think?
So I guess I can at least just speak to why pigs are noisy at night. So I don't know if you've heard of Heifer International. Emily, have you heard of Heifer? So Heifer, they have some controversy about some of their programs, but essentially they have a ranch in Arkansas where students go and like groups go, and they do a whole bunch of like kind of group things. And then the kids, and then me as a chaperone, had to go live in different like countries. So I was assigned to live in Thailand, and Thailand, below Thailand was a pig. So I, as a teacher, had to sleep in a sleeping bag in this house that was above the ground, and below was the pig. And so I was freaking out because I heard all these noises and I thought like all the stuff was being taken, and turns out it was just the pig at night ruffling around and like eating and whatnot. But it was really great. So one of their missions is to really get kids or whoever up close to animals, and you can really see like much more of their humanity when you're staring like them, like you're nose to nose with them. And so that's when I first was like, oh, pigs are so cute. You know, they're just a little on the noisy side and a little muddy, but it was just really cool. Like we got to see goats and all sorts of animals. So it was just a really interesting opportunity to get just, again, very, very close to the animals.
That sounds really awesome. I would love to hang out with pigs that much. I've spent a lot of time with like goats, and I have a friend who the person with goats, they have a variety of other animals that just live happily on their property. And yeah, I haven't spent much time with pigs though, and I would love to because they seem amazing.
I was thinking about the question. I don't know if I learned it from veterinary or professional. I don't know if I learned it from this. I think it's pretty much that I learned from my daughter's partner. So I am a descendant of deaf non-speaking great-grandparents who had 13 hearing children, but then the generation skipped. So we grew up understanding finger spelling because at that time, Black people weren't being taught ASL as deaf people. They were treated as though they were useless, that they weren't mentally fit. Anyway, so my daughter's partner is a coda. She's the only hearing person in her immediate family, mom, dad, brothers, and the dog. So the dogs respond to American Sign Language. They communicate that way. They, you have to go outside, are you ready to eat, all of that. And that has caused me to think about this communication possibility that's boundless, right? But there's no boundary of language, right? No boundary. I mean, we put them there, but there really isn't, right? That this is really how connected we really are and how well we can be in relationship with one another, no matter the format of communication.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like there's a trainer who specializes in training dogs whom are deaf and or blind, and it's so amazing the communication that can happen between these two different species. And it's just incredible to think about. Dogs especially, there's so much research on how well they can read our body language. We certainly they can read our body language a lot better than we can read theirs. And it's, it's how our dogs, when people say things like, oh, our dogs can smell fear, maybe they can smell cancer and all these other crazy things, but they can also, they're so attuned to just getting slightly more tense. And, and there's been research on obviously cats and horses kind of having similar, being able to read human body language more similarly. And so it's really amazing to think about how they perceive us and how they are in tune with how we're feeling. And then thinking about just how crazy and amazing it is how other animals communicate with each other in ways that we'll never ever understand, how like echolocation and all these crazy things that we might not even know exist yet. So it's so I bring that up because we need to not only care about the animals who can communicate with us, but also the animals who also having that respect for the animals who communicate in all these other amazing ways. So
do you think that some of this do you think that it's almost out of a requirement because of the power dynamics that we don't have to figure out, we don't have to be in tune, right? Because we are the powerful, as you will. But non-human animals, it's required, right, to survive, and it's instinctual. It's almost like people who, it's almost like it is privilege, right, of I don't have to do this or know about this because I don't experience that, right? And that may be even an approach to humane pedagogy, right? That because to be humane, it's required for us to consider it, right? But okay, I'm done.
No, I love that. I think that's such a good point, and it's so interesting because so I'm obviously a woman, and when I go to when I work with clients who, yeah, that's true. I see they're like, oh. So when I go and work with my clients, it's so interesting how much of a more challenging time I have working with male clients, especially white male clients, because there's this. Not only do they, obviously, is there this whole other thing about listening to me, but also they just have, not all males, but they often have this perception that they have to discipline and punish and show the animal that they're in charge, and they have to be the dominant one, the leader, all that stuff. And it's they so much want to have that hierarchy, like they want that. And so that's, I'm a big believer in how we shouldn't view our relationships with other animals through that hierarchical lens, because it just doesn't do us any favors. It certainly doesn't do them any favors. Well, it depends on how, I guess people can argue that it does the human favors, but especially when we're training our dogs, I feel like it doesn't do us any favors, because then they just end up afraid of us. But it's just so interesting. I guess I haven't fully appreciated the kind of how those power dynamics can impact our relationships in so many ways. So thank you for mentioning that.
I mean, comparably, right? If that's what some people's parenting styles, typically cis white men, that is how they believe it, you parent, right? You know, so if I kind of, so I view young Thug as my child, right? But I wasn't that kind of parent, right? So to my human children, that dominating. And so I think that the disposition is all based on how we interact with humans and non-human animals, right? With human animals and non-human animals, it dictates that, which is so entrenched in our culture.
It is, and it's why, like, I think sometimes when I talk about like, oh, can an animal trainer ultimately teach their clients who are there for dog training to be kinder to not just dogs, but pigs and cows and chickens and rats and like, you know, and other people, you know. I think sometimes people are like, that seems like a big jump to like, for a dog trainer to like have that impact. But for me, I mean, just learning how to not view my relationship with my dog through that, like, I need to have power over my dog, I need to dominate my dog, I need to correct my dog for all their bad behavior. Once I was able to shift my perspective and say, oh, actually, I'm just, you know, I'm gonna reward my dog for all of the amazing things that they do, and I'm gonna focus on, you know, having a good relationship with them, and identifying what their needs are and how I can meet those needs. It completely changed how I view my relationship with my husband, and, you know, like how I interact with other people in my life. Because now I'm suddenly thinking like, oh, well, maybe that person who was a jerk to me at the grocery store, there just might be some needs there that aren't being met. You know, they're afraid, they're stressed, you know, like I'm suddenly thinking about that, like they're, you know, a dog who might be barking and lunging, but really they're afraid and stressed, and how can I make them feel more comfortable? So it's just, I personally think that by shifting how we feel about other animals, it can help us shift how we feel about other humans. So that's why I'm like so passionate about this, because that's been my own experience.
And last thing I was just going to say, there are programs for incarcerated people that it's where you nurture and raise a dog in order to shift your view, and shift you away from violence and dominance. I don't know if they're in women's facilities, but I know that they are in men's facilities. I've only had one woman client ever, so there's that. But I don't, it might be something worth, like, I'm not saying you don't know about it, but like maybe even sitting with it in research, in that it could be applied, right, to a humane pedagogy.
Yeah, that's something I've actually thought a lot about, and actually thought about maybe even just getting involved with it someday myself. And one of my, she was actually kind of my boss for a while, but one of my colleagues, she has a nonprofit, and that's what she does. So she basically works with like inmates. She also works with like teenagers that are in like juvenile detention, and they train dogs. That's what they do. And or they go into the shelter and take care of, you know, and help with the shelter animals. And it's just so amazing hearing her stories of how, you know, an inmate is working with a dog, and then is like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see my kid again, so that I can like go into that relationship with this in mind. And so it's amazing. I absolutely think that these ideas can be applied in so many ways. Yeah.
Just my plug. They're incarcerated people. We don't call them inmates. Like that does this othering thing too, like the language we use. Okay, so a person who is incarcerated can, you know, they can say what they want. I actually try to encourage incarcerated people not to even say that about themselves, because inmate is not person forward, right? Right.
Yes, that is such a good point. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
No problem.
Right. It's the same logic behind calling people with disabilities disabled. Not the way to go. Right. Excellent. Thanks for bringing that up. Lisa has her hand up.
Yeah. So as I was listening to you speak, Emily, it made me think that just going back to education in general, the things that you describe on how to foster positive behaviors in animals also applies in teaching and in education. And I taught 5th through 8th grade for many years back in the 90s, you know, and it's definitely, you know, when you're teaching is something you pick up on really quickly, obviously, that, you know, the more positive reinforcement you can give your students and understand why they might be having bad behaviors, that, you know, the better off you're going to be both for the student and for the parent. So I also think then, to answer your question about can humane pedagogy, you know, benefit or be applied to other areas, you know, you were talking about your vet techs and your trainers and stuff like that. And I would argue, and this is my own personal opinion, that pedagogy can benefit any area of work in general. And I say that because for me, it comes down to also vocation, you know, like if we think about what we wanted to do when we were small kids and stuff, and where we are in the field today, you know, there's some people that would say, oh, I've always wanted to be a teacher, right? And they thrive in being a teacher and educator, and that's part of their vocation. And yet when they have an opportunity to learn about pedagogy, it kind of brings the passion together with the theoretical, obviously, and makes a better educator. The flip side happens too. And there's plenty of people in education who don't have a vocation, they don't have the vocation and they don't have the pedagogy and stuff. So it raises questions in my mind about how effective are they at being educators. Nevertheless, I think if you're ever in a situation where there's any sort of training or educating or anything that you're sharing knowledge with somebody else, having pedagogy, regardless of the type of pedagogy, because there's lots out there in terms of their approach on how you deliver your information, can only enhance the work that you're doing and stuff. So yeah, those are just my 2 cents. And for Mally, there are canine companion programs in women's institutions and as well. I have a friend who, she doesn't work in the training per se. She preps the pups. So she gets them as puppies and has them for, I don't know, the first 8 months to get them with their basic training. And then she trains them and gives them over then to the canine companion programs in the Women's Institute in Oregon. So they do exist. No.
Now,
Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. I think that's very affirming, because when I first was kind of interested in this, and like, is this weird to like incorporate like pedagogy and like something that, like, you know, a vet like working with their client, especially when they're like maybe have like 15 minutes, you know, to talk to the person, like, but I really appreciate kind of that idea of, you know, just going, it's not just, it's like shaping like just how you interact and how you educate. And it's, I don't know, I think, thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate it.
now on this thread of, I guess what we're discussing is the limits of humane pedagogy. I'm reminded of a movie, of course, you know, movies. It's called Tombstone. Kurt Russell. I don't know if you've seen it, right? Like Elisa recalls. In the first act, when Kurt Russell is supposed to be introduced to the audience, right? He's Wyatt Earp, you know, he's the hero of the story and so on. The train arrives, you know, it's very, you know, dramatic and so on. And his horse, many horses are being traveled along with the train. There's this, you know, this worker that is using a very heavy rope, hitting the horse really heavily obviously hurting the horse, right? And so Wyatt Earp walks up to him, Kurt Russell, and sees this and grabs the man by the arm, pulls the rope from his hand and starts hitting him over the head. And says, then he asks him, says, "It hurts, don't it?" And obviously it hurts. So he says, "Let go of the horse," and then grabs the horse. So he's teaching them that moment that empathy, have empathy for the horse. What you're doing is hurting the horse, right? Yes, it forces the horse to get off the train, but there are other means, right? Humane means to do this. So this begs the question, can we do this with animal trainers? Say, well, you know, hitting the dog to make him or her to conform to your commands. Is this the right way to go? Why don't we hit you, all right, a couple of times with your permission and see what it feels like, so you can have empathy for this sentient being that feels pain. And let's find another way of working with the dog. Now, these are ethical questions. To what extent can we employ these techniques where people could actually learn? Because I can guarantee that if somebody does that, they'll learn, like, yeah, it does hurt, right? And the dog, is squeamish when I do that to them. So maybe that's not the way to go. So this is an area of exploration in many ways. The limits of this kind of pedagogy. How are we going to know the limits? Well, we have to go beyond the limits to discover the limits. And this is where, radical approaches can take place.
Yeah, it's very interesting because there actually are some trainers who will do things like put a shock collar on themselves and say, and shock themselves, like, look, it's not that bad. But but they know what's happening. They're in control of it happening to them. Or even if it's done unexpectedly, if they give the controller to someone else, they still know what this thing is on them and can expect it at some point and can conceptualize, there's just that little bit more sense of control than if you put it on an animal who has no idea what it is, no idea when it's happening to them. It's just so interesting how sometimes even when we try to make points, we forget that, kind of as Macy was mentioning earlier, like we have some pretty significant limitations in actually and truly understanding the reality of that animal. And so maybe by acknowledging that, the answer is to just let the animal be, acknowledge that, or at the very least, go the route that is least risky of causing, pain, discomfort, fear. If I'm comparing like training methods, if I primarily train using food and reward, treats and toys and play and those fun things versus training using, prong collars, which are the collars that have like the metal pokes that poke into dogs' necks, and shock collars and choke chains. Obviously, one is more likely to cause pain, fear, and discomfort than the other. And, sure, maybe some dogs, it might not be as significant to them because of X, Y, Z, but do we actually know, do we really know how much it's causing pain or fear and anxiety? I don't know. Obviously this stuff is stuff that makes me like.
But you know what? I'm thinking of this where we handcuff, shackle, and cage humans, and then we say they're being treated like animals, and that's not okay. But we shouldn't be treating animals that way, right? So the idea that violence is the means by which we should control society is throughout the whole our whole existence, right? Like I'm not, you know, even zoos, right? Like it's just that we contain and strap in and do any of that to any being is problematic, but also we're so numb to it, and we're so entrenched in the crime and punishment model, so-called, again, in this disciplinary way of lesson, right? Retribution and interaction, and this eye for eye or 2 eyes for the toe, you know, like it's very, the theme is throughout, right? That, and for a human to say, oh, well, I tried it and it's not that bad, you know, I've taken it, trying, which is well intended, right? I guess, but it's that bad whether you thought it was that bad or not, right? Like your experience with it is not the same, right? So, and I was just thinking of that in all aspects, right? In every aspect, it's this caging, violent way we control society.
Something that Mally, one really good point, something that you said and also that Emily said, made me think of an argument that is often used, I guess, within the animal rights community, specifically regarding different sea animals. There's like a big argument as to whether they're sentient or not, whether they feel or not. And so many people argue for, you know, we can put them in boiling water because they don't feel anything. And then the other side is saying, no, they do feel something. And we don't know, but why not give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they do, and maybe like we shouldn't be doing these things because like the alternative is so horrific, but we don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt because it doesn't benefit us.
So is it wrong for a parent, let's say a parent sees a child pour some hot water on a cat? It obviously hurts the cat runs away. His parent says, okay, give me your hand, and pours a little bit of hot water on the child's hand. Is that wrong?
Yes. Yeah. like I see where you're going with this, but like, you know, basically like what Mally was saying, like violence, you know, doesn't, no matter how well intended it is, it's still violence, and we're perpetuating that as an option. And you know, we're just making, I don't know, I just feel like
right. And I mean,
better ways.
I would venture to say that
child?
it's not the first. Yeah, I was gonna say it's not the first time a child has experienced something that is hot or burning, right? So rather than inflict that, maybe recall that as a means to make the point, right, and teach humanity. So sorry, I interrupted someone.
No, that's fine. So that's the question, right? How do you non-violently teach these kinds of ethics that will stay, right? Because you just tell the child, don't do that, that's wrong. The child will go, oh yeah, okay, my parent says I'm not going to do it. So next time the parent is not around, the child may do it again. How can this be effective where it becomes permanently imprinted on the child's consciousness? The next time child sees the cat, says, I have to treat this cat gently, kindly, like I do with my little brother or some other people. These are really difficult questions to answer. By talking, it does not work to the extent that you want this to be permanent.
So there's such a thing as action-oriented parenting, right? Like I'm sure you, if you've heard of it. I mean, in this, if you're in this kind of work at all, right? Like, and you've been a parent, and the issue is understanding the difference between consequence, natural consequence of actions, and punishment or retribution, right?
Mhm.
And so natural consequence is you didn't put on sunscreen and now you're burnt, right?
Mhm.
So that's, but even though I told you to put on sunscreen, and that's my role is to teach you that if you don't put on sunscreen, you will burn. That may not be the lesson, right? That may not be the way it's learned. You will then burn, right?
Mhm.
And so I would say that that's kind of that model, right? Where we really are always trying to pull between the difference in consequences, because people who act without consequence or act badly without consequence continue to do it. Whatever you do that you do over and over again, you just get better at it, right? Like it's just, that's the way that works. But consequence is not the same as
Mhm.
discipline, and that we think we know the consequence or what we should provide as a means to teach is also a little bit problematic, right?
Mhm.
You'll learn not to cross the street without looking both ways, sometimes in a really, really bad way, and sometimes I got hit by a car, right?
Mhm.
So that, and I'm not saying that that's, but that's how we learn, right? The consequence, natural consequences, I guess, are the forefront of, I guess, if that's forward how we are parenting or educating or acting, then it removes that retributional authority that we think we know how to teach you that you shouldn't do that.
Right. The way my father learned how to swim was they threw him in the pool, sink or swim. But the way you learn the same way that we taught our son was like, okay, here's a teacher, here's the lessons we paid for. You go ahead and learn how to swim, right? So which one is a better swimmer as a result of what action? We'll never know, right?
But like, what about the emotional, like the emotional experience of each swimmer? Like, is it really about who's a better swimmer, or is it about when you go, like when one person goes swimming, they're like, I love swimming. This makes, like, I enjoy this. I learned, like, I had such a great time and I learned in these classes, versus, I mean, you might feel a little uncomfortable about being, like there might always be that sense of anxiety, or maybe you have like this association with the person who, threw them in, or, like thinking about that. So for me, in response to your question, well, why do I have to supply, the discipline or the consequence to the child? Maybe instead I ask them, like, why did they feel the need to put boiling water on the cat? Can we talk about that? Is there a need there that's not being met? And that led to that behavior. And can I then change that behavior by better meeting that child's needs? So maybe the child's not getting enough attention, like I don't know anything about children. But like, for a dog, if a dog just, bit the cat or something, maybe it's because they aren't having their needs met. They're not getting enough social interaction or physical and mental stimulation, and so asking those types of questions, I feel like is a better strategy than thinking, how can I discipline this kid for making that bad decision? I'd rather understand the decision and then maybe try to shape the behavior from that way.
And sometimes it's just inquiry, it's curiosity, right? It may not even be something that needs necessarily disciplined, but inquiry. What happens if I do this? Because children, that's what children do. They
do. Yeah.
We squash all that, right? We do a great job usually by about 5. Once you start kindergarten, if you got some left, it's going to get squashed, right? So there's this why, and they don't know why. So I can tell you that children most times don't know why they did that, whatever that thing is, particularly if it was dangerous, right? Like it was curiosity or inquiry or something, something they saw, something they thought, oh, I could try that, you know, something like that. But that's why if we're consequence forward, it removes that audacity to think you did it with some intention and now you need an intentional negative consequence.
What I heard you asking, Tony, is like, what is moral education? How do we teach, like, how do we develop and teach moral education, morality, right? And really, it's like, this is something that happens in utero and beyond. It's like, it's why we're really looking culturally, or I hope we're looking culturally at dismantling generational trauma, and like, how do we interrelate? How do we interrelate with the earth? How do we example appropriate behavior and care? Yeah, and I think that so much is like, what is our relationship? How do we attend to the child? How do we attend to the cat when they are? How do we attend to teaching observation of the world around, so that the children can learn how to relate to the world around in a way that they can do inquiry in a way that, you know, if it causes some harm, it's hopefully mostly to themselves and minimal. Yeah.
Children, you know, as someone who has children, and myself remembering I was a child in different cultures. I grew up in different cultures at different stages of my life. And this is especially with boys, this happens a lot, where they have to experience violence at some point in second grade, third grade, high school, what have you. Either as a result of a fight or a conflict that somehow inadvertently turns into a physical, you know, interaction, and they learn lessons from it. I remember our son, when he was in first grade, or was it second grade? It was either first or second grade. There were these two boys, they were twins, who were significantly smaller than him, but the two of them together would just tease him about all kinds of things. You know, our son was always more mature for his age, you know, be talking about serious things, and they would make fun of that. And one day he got so frustrated that he grabbed both of these boys by the neck, right? What do you call it when you grab somebody with around the neck, right? And so he was moving them around the yard. Obviously, you know, the authorities, this is a private school. So very quickly they figure it out. They jump in and they pull the boys apart. And so we got called in, and I'm talking to the vice principal, and she's angry, right? This is violence, right? We don't tolerate this here and all that. And so at some point, and then my son is sitting in the car while she's telling me this, very angrily, authoritatively, being violent towards both of us with her words. So I said, stop. At some point, I had to stop her. I said, you need to stop. You need to stop this violence right now. Because ironically, you're talking about nonviolence, but you're being violent towards us. And secondly, have you examined the microaggressions that those two little boys inflicted upon my son over time? And so, and he gets frustrated to a point because he doesn't know what else to do, because the teachers and the vice principal, nobody's responding to this because they don't see physical violence, right? So he grabs the boys by the neck and says, no more, right? This stops here. So I did not feel the need to punish my son or give him a lecture about what he had done, other than the fact that we don't resolve issues violently unless we are defending ourselves, right? I don't think any of you in this room would stop defending yourself if somebody's attacking you. Somebody just opens the door coming at you with a knife, you'll find the first available weapon to fend off that person and save your lives. So to say that we cannot have violence at all to eliminate violence in any context is, I think it's an impossible thing for human existence. So this behooves us to understand that, you know, as Amy's pointing out, you know, the moral education around what to do about violence, right? In what context do we recognize violence for its value, or for its destructiveness, right? Obviously, we don't want to teach our kids to say, well, you get hit, you just hit right back, or go hit others, right? So you don't get hit again. No, we don't do that. But if another child is hitting my child, I'm going to tell him, well, make sure you have the skills to defend yourself, because you don't want to sit there and get beat up and get hurt and injured and so on. But that's not the kind of thing that we want to cultivate, right? You know, violence being responses to other violent means, right? If you can get away, right? You know, if you want to report it to people that actually understand and respond, you know, all these things, these discussions take place at the administrative level of schools. But then you've got these rigid people that want to implement rigid policies about these things, zero tolerance policies and so on, thinking that that produces results. Yes, it produces results for your books and for you don't have to deal with this stuff, but that doesn't mean that violent confrontations do not happen at microaggression level, from teacher to student, from student to other student, from non-binary students who are sitting in the classroom, and all these cisgender students, right, attacking and teasing and bugging that student, but meanwhile acting like, you know, perfect citizens while they're in assembly and so on. So the same thing, of course, applies here in this discussion about animals, right? If we can be kind to our animals, then we must be kind to our fellow human beings. If we can be kind to our fellow human beings, therefore we must be kind to our fellow non-human animals who are our brothers and sisters in many ways. And this includes the trees. This includes the water. This includes the air and everything else that is part of this ecosystem. So I really appreciate that we are looking at different strands of these sort of pedagogies and trying to have these discussions around what to do, right? Because ultimately, if we're not responding to the question of what to do, then it's just talk. So I'll stop talking. What are your thoughts?
I'm reminded, I heard a story recently of a friend of mine's granddaughter was, prior to the pandemic, she was in kindergarten, she lives in Texas, and was sent home for punching a boy who had been bullying her. And that she had had enough. And it was because of that, you know, zero tolerance policy that this child, you know, felt the need to take matters into her own hand. Same thing happened with my daughter. She got sent home for stringing a boy from a tree because he wouldn't stop picking on her friend. But yeah, and so it's this interesting thing of like, where is where is reconciliation? Where is mediation? How, like when children are calling out, as Emily was saying with animals, there is a need, and can we see, can we hear, can we enter into each other's skins and feel empathy, feel, sense what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this because I was in school before the zero tolerance era. First, I just want to say that has stopped not one school shooting. So there's that, which is supposedly what it was implemented to do. But also, I took karate when I was a very, 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 very small child, like, and started school at 4. So even tinier than my peers in school. So anyway, in middle school, so that's why I took my parents had me in that, because I was teased relentlessly as well. So in my 6th grade year, every morning in our homeroom, they would play Keep the Hat Away from the Girls. I think it was Keep the Hat Away from the Girls or something. And they would toss the hat, around the room. I did not participate because I was not a morning person at that time. So at 7:30, that was not happening. So I was sitting at my desk. The hat landed on my desk. I got up to just throw it back into the game. And a boy came behind and so he was grabbing me like this from behind, and my instinct was what I had learned to do, and I defensively used a move to get him off me, and I went back and it knocked the lenses out of his glasses, right? And he was probably at least a foot taller than me, right? We're in the same grade, but at least a foot taller than me, as everyone was and still is. So I got called down to the office when we both did, right? It was, so then after I did that, he starts coming for me. I picked up a desk to stop him. And that's when we got sent down to the office. So they call, my parents. The principal was my dad's junior high teacher. So that's how the community was. But principal was my dad's old junior high teacher. And they called and they said, we have to tell you. And they called my mom first. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're fighting. And, my dad and stepdad get there and they're like, yes, pick up anything. Do not let this happen to you, right? And the young man, we're sitting there waiting on our parents to come in, and he just keeps staring at me saying, I can't believe you decked me, And so the way it was treated, though, in this kind of natural way, you have to stop it, right? You have to say stop and remove the people from the situation. But there was nothing decided that there was this inherently violent action, right? It was just a string of events that then they called our parents, told them about it. They came in. We didn't get in trouble. We didn't get suspended, both of us Black children. But also the principal was the first Black woman principal in the United States. So she was going to manage it. But so all of those things speak to, yes, there is going to be a need of what we call violence sometimes, or a natural reaction that just puts us in that position where the reaction to it doesn't have to be violent as well, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're not getting on that school to prison pipeline and disciplined and the police in the school and all of that. So I think that may be, I would hope, where we could head back to, rather than this continuation of how we're inflicting it and inflicting it and using it as a means to treat it and all of that.
What comes to my mind is that we're all working from a place of fear, like fearing. When children have conflicts, it's like we can't separate ourselves out of the multiple fears, because they're just humans. They're just humans trying to figure out how to be human. And it's hard. It's really hard. We're here grappling with this. And so why we think they can just do it, I don't understand.
Mm-hmm. My sister-in-law was the school board president on the school board when I was hired in my school district. And she said something that she said, we're, as parents, we are sending the only kids we have. like. They are going to be, they're going to have their flaws, but like, remember that they are our onlys. Like they are only, kid or only son or only daughter, only whatever name. And like, I think what she was really trying to say is that like, we don't have our best kid like hiding in the refrigerator. Like they're going to come to us with their flaws and everything, but they are ours. And like every time that I have a stop a moment to just like not be directly teaching or putting out a fire, and I'm just sitting with a kid and just like looking at them and thinking like, this is, some mom and some dads like only whoever. And it just like hits me that like, of course they're going to be, protective and defensive. And of course they're going to come from a place of like all of the things. Cause like, it can be really hard when you're trying to negotiate situations or like awkward things. I had a student who just said like some really inappropriate phrase, like, I'm going to go shoot the school or something. I was like, oh, really? Like, and so I had to call the parents and be like, okay, this is what happened. And, I'm sending it off to the principal. And I really, really didn't want to have to do this, but obviously there are certain words and certain phrases in schools we have to, at least just send to the principal for a conversation. And I have to call and all these things, and just trying to like negotiate those like spaces in which it's like helping kids like figure out how they, how there can be fair and not harmful acts of violence against students when they make mistakes. And I just thought it was a really powerful like reminder that like, they're sending their best, and we're going to do the best we can with them. And, I think when we approach parents in that way, it really helps calm everybody down, because I think everybody can get to that very like protective phase with their kid, even with missing work. Like I teach in a district where like missing work can be taken very personally, and our parents get really upset and start blaming everybody around them, and can be very hard to deal with if you're, afraid for your own job that they're going to go like up the chain of command and kind of accuse you and try to get you fired because of it. And so you can get kind of in this defensive place, but just continue to remember that they're sending their best and their most precious sometimes helps, I think.
Okay, folks, it is 1 o'clock almost Pacific time. So we've been at it for a couple of hours. I'm happy to keep the floor open if you want to continue talking, or we could just end our meeting and move on. Now, before we do any of that, does anybody have any specific questions or feedback about your experience with the class, experience with the program, or how the papers are going, or anything, related to our work?
I have a question about the research paper.
Mm-hmm.
If you could give a 1 to 2 sentence prompt, what might that look like?
Like in abstract form for anybody's paper?
Yeah.
Okay. You are an inquiry about education. And there are different elements to education. What is the notion? The very notion of education should be an inquiry question. So you enter into inquiry, you may have some, presumed ideas, like, assumptions that you enter into inquiry, or you may decide to, like, what grounded theory methodology is, 0 assumptions, just go into inquiry. Then you come up with certain conclusions. That is your voice as a result of synthesis from your research and your understanding and interpretation of research. And your voice tells me, the reader, or whomever is going to read, if you decide to publish your paper at some point, the reader tells the reader whether you've done this inquiry to arrive at a point of action or a point of further inquiry. And all of this work, the paper as a result of your inquiry, has to be within the framework of what we have done in this course. Period. Does that sound like a decent prompt?
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
It's more than one sentence, by
That's okay.
the way.
The more, the better.
Right.
Tony, can you run through, I guess maybe it's just the deadline and anything, are there any other expectations like in Dr. Jackson's class, we have to submit our paper to the VWC? Is there anything like that?
No, you don't have to submit it anywhere else other than to, on the Sakai page for me to read. And now, if you're going to be late with the deadline, deadlines are there to be extended, some people would say. At least we say that in the publishing world. Whenever my editor calls us, well, where's the chapter? And I said, well, deadlines are there to be extended. But don't spread this word around the institution, right? It's like, hey, Kashani said deadlines are here to be extended. Now, point being that don't stress over, well, I didn't meet the deadline, now I'm not going to pass the course, right? Because there's no grading here happening. By the time we finish week 14, which I think is 3 weeks from now, yes? Somebody confirm.
That's actually was going to be one of my questions. So like the paper's due the end of week 14 or whatever. And I guess I'm just concerned I'm like going to do the math wrong and like submit it the wrong week or something.
I mean, the prudent thing to do is if you're done with it, just submit it. I mean, don't sit on it and thinking, oh, maybe if I spend another few more days of meditation, I can make it perfect. It's not going to be perfect, right? Nothing in the world is perfect. Perfection is a misnomer, but it's going to be a good paper. I mean, I am very pleased with the work we've done with this course. And most of the credit goes to you guys because you are smart and you're committed. Everybody that enters these doctoral programs is smart, but are they committed? That's the difference between those who survive the programs, those who drop out. If you're committed, then your paper is going to be a good paper. Now, if you want to continue the work beyond that paper at some level for publishing or for continuation with your dissertation, all of that, I'm always available to consult, to work with you, etc. As far as the obligation that you have to meet for this class, if end of week 14, a few more days after that, you need another week or so, no problem. We'll work that out. If, God forbid, something happens, life happens, you need an incomplete, then we can talk about that too. But I encourage you to just keep working and then finish the paper. As soon as it's done, just submit it.
So you don't have a clear day for us?
Well, I do. It says the end of week 14.
Okay.
So we are at the end of week 12 now, yes. And next week, the 31st, no, August 1st is the end of week 13th, right?
Week 12, I would say.
Yeah, I think we just completed week 11 and we're heading into week 12.
Yeah.
That's how my other courses.
Right. You're right. Because the next 2 weeks, this week and the following week, there's no discussions.
Right.
Right.
So the following week is week 12, and then you have 2 weeks after that. So 3 weeks. I was correct in the first time I said this.
August 13th, according to my calculations, is the end of week 14.
What day?
August 13th.
August 13th.
Isn't that's a Friday? So would it be technically August 15th would be?
Blame Lisa for that. Don't.
August 15th is what it says on Sakai at 10:25 a.m.
Oh boy, 10:25 a.m. Holy shit. Okay. August 15, 10:20, what is it, 10:25? Okay, I'm gonna make an executive decision. August 15 at 10:27 and 20 seconds. Is when,
Is that Pacific time?
ooh, it's always Pacific time. Come on, I'm the
Oh,
benevolent.
it
teacher.
works. Pacific time works to my advantage. Gives me 3 more hours.
Pacific time. Now, if you were in Hawaii,
Right.
you'd be in trouble. Yeah, no worries. Just keep in touch with me. You guys, you see that I'm available to you. So, just call, text, email, bug me, whatever, stop by, send food, send cash, whatever.
Mally has had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mally. Was this just
It's
Mally?
okay. I'm back and so sorry. I'm back and forth. You know what I'm doing. I'm cooking. That's what I do. And
I'm
so
selling peas.
are you? I'm making some marinara from scratch, and I'm having zucchini and squash lasagna. So zucchini in lieu of pasta.
All right, we're coming over.
Yeah. And I did go plant-based. I just have to say that I did go plant-based because of Dana. Is her last name Fuller? Is that her last name? What's her last name?
Dana at the library?
McCann.
No.
Fall?
Yeah,
I
there's
think
an
yeah, McFall.
Fall.
okay.
Oh.
But my question was, so I didn't submit the mid report because my actual first submission met the requirements of the mid report. Like it already had over 10 resources, and I've only gathered about 3 or 4 more. Should I just submit that with the 4 more references? Because it didn't seem
Okay, Mally, when you submit, just give me a paragraph, at least a paragraph, more, telling me what you've done beyond what we talked about the last time, where you're at.
okay.
That's what I want.
Okay.
That's the midterm. And of course, submit the other stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's all you got to do. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's always easier than graduate students expect. That's my model.
Yeah, I
Of
went to
course
law school, so law school already taught me how smart I wasn't. So
Yeah.
now I'm ready.
That's right. I mean, it's easy for me. I'm just sitting here telling you to do this or that. But, it's a process. As long as you trust the process, it'll get done. Yeah. I know there's anxieties about this stuff. And, it's natural. We have anxieties about anything that has deadlines or, it impacts our, future and all these things. But everything impacts our lives. So, I get a lot of mileage out of this one, and my family sometimes wants to beat me over the head and say, stop saying this. Every step of the journey is the journey. Yeah. My wife's looking at me. I was like, you again saying that? I'll kill you. Yeah. Anyways.
Tony, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do we in this program have more classes with you?
No, this is the only one I teach at the program. However, I pitched this. This was suggested to me after a couple of folks saw my TED Talk. It says, we need to do a course on this. So I pitched a course around media and social justice, which I think will be very popular because my ego always, talks to me about this. So yeah, I think that will happen, but it won't happen for a while. I think the first time we can offer that would be in May of next year. And but I am, if you want to work with me about, your dissertation or other stuff, independent study and all that, obviously you have to go through the channels, Jonathan and Michael and. So, we want to work with Tony and then I'll make myself available to you. Yeah, but as far as a fundamental course, this is the only one that I'm teaching now. Things can change, all right? This program is expanding and I am committed. So, when I said yes to Michael Rafanti to join the faculty, he asked me, do I have your commitment? And I said, yes. So this is the kind of work that really gets my juices going.
Are you chairing any dissertations right now?
Not as of yet, no.
I mean, dissertation committee, sorry.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Not as of
Okay.
yet, but I'm always open to these things. Yeah. I mean, open to initial conversation and then see if I'm in the right fit with the right student and then moving forward. So,
Well,
yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate this conversation. It was really, really great. I feel like I learned a lot, and I really, really appreciate you providing this opportunity for us to just talk and kind of have like a, I really liked the kind of presentation idea where it kind of give us a little bit of like build a little bit of a foundation of things we can talk about to kind of lead us in a particular direction, but then also the openness of being able to go beyond and kind of go where we're interested in going. And I feel like I learned a lot from other people's perspectives on, so I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for saying that. The acknowledgements are always appreciated. I do have another suggestion for you guys, and I hope you don't mind me saying you guys, y'all. Emily suggested I use y'all. Yeah. You can get together and create a salon. All right. With Zoom technology, salons are very effective. And I always encourage really sharp people that I work with, and you guys are ranked right up there. Seriously, building salons. When we do this kind of stuff, it is salons. The philosophy of salon is why you fix hair, but the philosophy of salon is to have this openness of the agenda, right, and not have a rigid, plan, all that. But there are some central questions that the salon members tackle. So that could be something that we can develop down the road. So I appreciate this very much. And I want to thank you for your commitment to this intellectual endeavor that we have here, which at some point in our lives will turn into some serious concrete actions. I mean, all of your projects here are really feasible projects. They just don't belong to the shelf. They belong to the streets. And I'm very pleased about that. Yeah.
Thank you, you all, for, Emily and Amy, for sharing your work with us, your research with us. I found that most helpful, and for this platform to even be able to do that.
Thank you, Manly, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. I feel like I've been learning so much from you, and I always love when you show up to the Zoom stuff, because I feel I'm always like, oh yes, I'm gonna learn some stuff from Manly today. So thanks for chiming in and sharing your experiences with all of us.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to so helpful in like really looking at like what is important and how to crystallize in just a few minutes what we're working with.
Yeah. If you guys want to meet one more time before the semester ends, we can do that for sure. Yeah. Would you like that? Or because you might be at a point of exhaustion, it's like no more. But so
I think it would be great to have just an opportunity for closure and just reflection, maybe a little bit. At least for me, I would appreciate it.
Okay, well, let's look at the calendar very quickly. See, August 15th is the last day of our work, so we could possibly meet, like, say, on August 7th even, which is like a couple of weeks from now. Does that sound reasonable?
I can't do that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that day doesn't work for me either. Sorry.
That's a Saturday, right? I'll be in I'll be in the Virgin Islands. I'm training on anti-racist education.
Okay, so August 14th is a day before we end the semester. So you should be theoretically done with your papers, right? Okay. Do you think that's reasonable to have a meeting on the 14th? Yeah. Okay. I'll make a note here and I'll send a feeler to everyone and see what folks want to do. And we'll take it from there. Well, as always, I want to thank you for taking the time, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.